It's officially March, which is honestly kind of weird to think about. But what this does mean is that we officially have more data regarding new vehicle sales, credit usage whenever it comes to financing vehicles, and we're really starting to get a better picture of how potentially 2024 could shake out for the car market as a whole. Though I know it definitely is still very early in the year. And so in this video, I want to talk about some of the most recent sales data that was released for the month of February. We're also going to be talking about an Experian report that was just released by Experian, breaking down some of the financing trends in the automotive industry. So what types of cars are being financed, who is financing them, and what type of delinquency rates are we seeing with these loans. We're going to be talking about all this and more. So let's get started, and we're going to kick this off by talking about vehicle sales data. I am going to have timestamps down in the description below if you want to skip around a bit. Now, just in the last few days, automotive manufacturers have released vehicle sales data for the month of February, and believe it or not, we're starting off 2024 with some very strong sales trends. In the month of February, we saw an estimated 6% sales growth, and this was not only across gas cars, but believe it or not, hybrids and EVs have grown as well. Now, when it comes to sales, let's kick it off by talking about some of the losers and some of the brands that have really been struggling to get their stride back post-pandemic, and Acura is definitely the biggest example of this. Acura saw a 6.1% decline in sales from February of this year compared to February of last year. They sold 9,769 cars this February compared to 10,408 last February. Hyundai Kia, which is the company that encompasses Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis, they also saw slower growth for the month of February as well. And unlike Acura, this brand did grow, though it grew at a slower pace compared to other brands. And in the month of February, Hyundai Kia only grew by 1.6%. But this statistic in and of itself may be a bit misleading because as it turns out, Hyundai and Genesis actually performed pretty decently, while Kia really bogged down the group as a whole. Hyundai and Genesis increased by 6% and 9.4% in the month of February, while Kia was down 3%. Kia was also down 2.4% in the month of January, so they have not had the strongest start to 2024. Now, believe it or not, of the major brands that have released sales data for the month of February, Kia and Acura are the only two brands that saw negative sales growth for the month. And this is really a great sign for the automotive market as a whole, because if we look at the bottom three performers of the sales data that we currently have access to, sure, Acura and Kia are number 1 and number 2 losers. But the third loser here is actually one that shouldn't be considered a loser at all, because while their sales growth wasn't as large as some competitors, it also wasn't bad either. And the third place goes to Subaru, which saw sales growth of 6.1% for the month of February. Mazda was the fourth lowest, and they saw sales growth of 6.7%. And so while manufacturers like Subaru and Mazda didn't see the double-digit growth of some other automakers, they are at least in the green, and they are seeing positive growth year over year, which is a good sign. Ford had a particularly strong February, seeing 10.5% sales growth, and they sold 174,192 vehicles. Ford's EV line grew a whopping 81%, and their hybrids grew by 32%. Interestingly enough, though, despite the fact that EVs and hybrids grew for Ford, gas cars still make up 89% of total sales for the brand, which is pretty crazy to think about. Lincoln, which is under the Ford umbrella, also grew by a lot in January, and they grew by 38%. In fact, of all of the brands that we're keeping track of in this video, Lincoln saw the largest sales growth. Ford even sold more than Toyota, who sold 165,900 units, which was up 16%. And Lexus, which is also under the Toyota brand, was up 17%. EVs and hybrids for Toyota grew by 84% in February. While Acura, which is under the Honda umbrella, had a really weak February, Honda itself actually had a really strong month. And they saw an increase of 32.3% from February of last year to this year. GM, at the point of recording this video, has not released their February data. If they end up releasing it by the time I edit this video, I will input the results here. Stellantis, which is the brand behind Jeep, Dodge, Ram, and many others, they also didn't release their February data, and truthfully, it's really difficult to gauge where they stand at this point in the year. Stellantis has had a tough time selling cars. In fact, last year, sales were down for Stellantis by 1%. while the overall automotive market rose by 8%. And so they were one of the only large automakers out there that saw a decline in sales in the overall improving car market. So regardless of the growth or declines of Stellantis last month, they've definitely been having a hard time post-pandemic. Now, don't get it twisted, automakers are seeing strong sales data. They are selling more cars for the most part today than they were this time last year. But this isn't due to a huge demand in cars, and this isn't due to a car market that's favoring the dealer, like what we saw in 2021 and 2022. The reason why we are seeing such large increases in sales from February of last year to February of this year is, believe it or not, still in part due to the pandemic. You see, even last year, dealerships were having trouble stocking their lots. There was still enough demand in the car market, and in general, numbers were still deflated from where production had to be halted or it was slowed down. And so we've been seeing these double-digit rises in sales due to the fact that for the first time post-pandemic, dealerships actually have a lot of inventory to sell, and as a result, they're seeing increases in their sales numbers. And so the growth that we're seeing today is based and compared to numbers that were deflated because of shortages. And today, as we see here in 2024, dealership inventory is finally returning to post-pandemic levels. In fact, dealership inventory is not only on par with 2019 and 2020 levels, it's actually surpassed those levels. And according to a Cox Automotive report from January of 2020, so just a few months before the pandemic began, vehicles day supply at dealership was 76 days. In the most recent inventory report released by Cox, which was released in mid-February for January, inventory for new vehicles was at 80 days. This means that there's actually a larger supply of vehicles today in 2024 than there was this time in 2020 prior to the pandemic beginning. And of that, you can see that the majority of brands actually have more days supply than the average. Toyota is still the automaker with the tightest supply of just 36 days. Honda and Lexus trail in second and third place, though they have quite a bit more inventory than Toyota, but Volkswagen, Ford, Audi, Nissan, Buick, Jeep, Infiniti, Genesis, and Ram all have over 100 days worth of supply. And so what this data points to the fact is that no, we aren't seeing an increase in sales growth because of any unprecedented demand, and that if anything, the data really points to the fact that dealerships are actually having trouble selling cars. And when it comes to some of the factors that are benefiting the buyer and really incentivizing them to buy a car in this current market, it comes down to a few things, including car prices going down, a larger inventory and selection to choose from, as well as dealership incentives going up, which all of these things are caused by supply and demand. As we currently sit, there is more of a supply than there is a demand for many types of vehicles. And because of this, we are seeing a slew of benefits that are really helping the customer be able to buy a car in present day. But now let's take a look at this Experian report and let's look at the current state of the financing market for these types of cars. Right here, you can see a breakdown of the percentage of vehicles that are financed. And over the last couple of years, the amount of vehicles that are financed have declined, both across used and new vehicles. You can see the percentage of vehicles financed here, and you can see the makeup of how many vehicles financed, which percentage of those is used versus which one is new. And you can see here that overall, the majority of new cars purchased are financed, but the majority of financed vehicles are actually used cars. Here you can see a breakdown of the distribution of loan risk. The distribution of deep subprime, subprime, and near-prime borrowers have decreased over the years, which is no surprise, while the distribution of superprime, so ideal borrowers, have increased, while deep subprime, subprime, and near subprime borrowers are decreasing, which is of course due to the fact that due to tightening lending standards and higher interest rates, just makes less sense for these types of borrowers to borrow money to buy a car, either because it would be too expensive or because they just can't get approved. And so as a result, really the only types of people who should be borrowing money in this current climate are ones that have a good enough score to where they would be able to get a somewhat reasonable rate. One extremely positive sign of this market is the average new amount financed. So according to Experian, the average new amount financed was $40,034 in 2021. It then went up to $41,509 in 2022. And we've actually seen this decline in 2023 to $40,366. That is a huge improvement of overall amount financed. But of course, if you're somebody who purchased a car in 2023, you may be thinking to yourself, I didn't notice any difference in the car payment. I'm still paying an astronomically high amount for a monthly car payment. And that is most likely due to the fact that interest rates are higher. So the lower amount that we're paying on cars is actually offset by the higher amount that we're paying in interest, which means despite the fact that car prices actually went down in 2023, according to Experian, the amount that you paid actually went up, which I know really sucks. In fact, the average monthly payment for a new car went from $647 in 2021 to $720 in 2022, and it increased slightly to $738 in 2023. And again, this can be explained by the skyrocketing rates that we've seen over the years. And in 2022, the average interest rate for a new car was 3.92%. In 2023, that rate is 7.18%. But we are seeing a lower term in the loans that are being taken out. You can see that it decreased from 69.31 months in 2022 to 67.87 months in 2023, which again is a contributing factor whenever we talk about this higher monthly car payment. You can see here a breakdown of the amount financed compared to the risk factor for the borrower. So again, deep subprime is somebody with a very poor credit score, super prime is somebody with a very good credit score, and there is kind of everything in between there. And you can see that near prime borrowers are financing the most money for a car purchase at $43,605. You can see that deep subprime and super prime are financing the least amounts. What's interesting is that these two borrowers are probably financing the least amounts for very different reasons. Super prime borrowers may be financing less because they're putting more down, while deep subprime borrowers are financing less because they're just buying less expensive cars. And you can see the year-over-year monthly payment trends for these borrower types as well, with deep subprime borrowers seeing the largest year-over-year increase in their monthly car payment, while super prime borrowers are seeing the lowest increase. We are seeing similar trends in the used market as well. The used amount financed is going down. It's at $26,685 compared to $27,970 last year. But despite the fact that the amount financed is going down, that monthly payment is going up, though it is going up just very, very slightly by $2 from 2022 to 2023. This is again due because of the higher interest rates, and in the fact of used cars, the term that people are financing vehicles has remained relatively flat, so the big factor that we're seeing here is the rate. And the rate that people are financing used cars has gone up, not as much as new cars, but it definitely has increased from 8.2% in 2021 to 11.93% in 2023. You can see here that the overall loan balances have been growing. It grew 4% year over year between 2022 and 2023. And as we've discussed many times on this channel, auto loan delinquencies are continuing to rise as well. The percentage of auto loans that are in 30-day delinquencies have gone from 2.31% to 2.47%. Auto loan balances have gone up from 2.73% delinquent to 3% of the total auto loan balances going delinquent. And 60-day delinquencies have increased by 0.87% to 0.96%, with the total balance delinquencies going up from 0.99% to 1.12%. The vast majority of delinquencies come from used cars, with 1.32% of used vehicles going delinquent, and the majority are purchased from independent dealerships, so not large franchise dealerships. So overall, what this data is pointing to is a very clear conclusion, and that conclusion is the fact that number one, vehicle sales are going up. This is a good sign, not because of the fact that dealerships now are succeeding more than they were this time last year, or they have a stronghold over consumers like maybe what we saw in 2021, but it is a good sign because it shows that inventory is increasing, prices are going down, and incentives are going up, which is making the prospect of purchasing a vehicle a more attractive option for car buyers. We're also seeing that dealership inventory is also going up. With the increase in sales that we're seeing, we're not seeing inventory go down, which is a great sign that supply and demand is beginning to favor the buyer. It's also a great sign that vehicle production and supply is returning to pre-pandemic levels. In fact, it isn't even returning, it has returned to pre-pandemic levels. And we're also beginning to see the financing side of things also return more to normal. Of course, interest rates are still incredibly high, and until interest rates go down, we're not going to be able to see the financing world of the automotive industry return to pre-pandemic levels. But in the meantime, we are beginning to see more people default, which is again more normal for the times. The amount that people are financing is not continuing to go up, it is going down, which is a great sign. And total amount financed within the automotive industry isn't continuing to climb at astronomical rate. While it is climbing less than it was previously, which again is good news. If you live around an area where there's a lot of dealerships, you've probably noticed this change with your own two eyes. I know that I have, is that dealership lots are more full than they were previously. Car prices are having to be discounted in order to be sold, and just overall, the car market is definitely favoring the buyer more than it was this time last year or 2 or 3 years ago. And while don't get me wrong, there is still a lot of room for improvement in the car market. There are still far too many dealerships marking up cars. There are still certain makes, like Toyota, for example, where production hasn't returned to normal, and car prices are still far too high compared to the average amount that the average American makes. But all things considered, things are trending in the right direction. And this is excellent news if you are somebody who's looking to buy a car. So if you are someone who's looking to buy, say, a Toyota, a Lexus, maybe it'd be a good idea to wait until closer to the end of the year to make that purchase. But if you're somebody who's wanting to buy a Genesis, a Jeep, a Ram, a Ford, a Lincoln, then now could be a good time to buy because of their high inventory levels. And of course, every other automaker in between, which would need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. But depending on what type of car you're wanting to buy, your own financial situation, now could be a decent time to make that car purchase. It really just depends on what you're looking for. But like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.